The stuff we bought from the illegal shops was as clean or as dirty as the stuff from the legal. I hate to say.
Okay, so it doesn't matter.
Oh my God. Hi, girlies.
Hello, Jenny.
Hi, Bria.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I feel like this is just a perfect high thing that has happened to us here. We had a really exciting, amazing interview last week, and then we got high for our next episode and forgot to do our intro for the interview. So,
and we kept saying, we'll get it done. We'll do it after the next episode. And then we ran off to lunch, and then now we're here, and I'm in different clothes.
But they probably wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we interviewed Paige St. from the LA Times. She is an amazing writer. 2011 Pulitzer Prize winner.
I was going to say, yeah.
Epic. Absolutely epic.
She has her own true crime podcast.
Love.
Yeah. She told us to take a listen if we want to. And I was like, I definitely think we will. So we can insert that in the
Yes, we will link her
description.
podcast and everything
Yeah.
below.
But she was awesome. Northern California based. Just did a bunch of pieces on the Palisade fires and just so well versed in like the marijuana business and really what's going on with like the like governance of the business in the state of California.
Not good.
Really, I remember driving home and being like, well, I don't think we should smoke any vapes anymore.
Anytime that I have smoked after, like over this past week, I have thought of her interview. And I'm just like, where did I get this?
Yeah.
Is this okay?
And then like the fact that certain people in my family are just hitting those vapes like they're candy. I'm just like, and then I think about how she was saying in the interview, like, our time now with marijuana is like how it was in the 50s with cigarettes, of how people were like, it's healthy. It helps with certain health cases, which I feel like it does. Like,
It definitely does.
I would rather hit a joint than take like the migraine horse pill that I would have to take, because it does the same thing and I feel better. And I, like, as someone who has had seizures, like when I take that migraine medication, like my hands are numb and I just like feel weird, whereas like if I just hit the joint, my migraine goes away. So it's kind of
so
sad.
wild. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it has to be so unregulated and messed up.
Yeah, so hopefully us talking about it will bring some regulation, but in these dark times,
we just have to advocate. We
Yeah.
just have to advocate and send this episode to everyone you know who smokes weed vapes.
Yeah.
It will change everything for them.
Yeah. And buy organically. That's like the thesis of what you're about to watch. Buy organically. Ask your dispensaries, like, where does it come from? Are these farms using pesticides?
She has a bunch of brands that she told us to look out for.
Don't buy Stizzy. That's like the worst one from the
It's
article.
so crazy because Stizzy is so popular.
I know. But I do feel like the children are not really hitting the Stiz like they
really?
were.
Okay, that's good.
No, myself included. I actually really haven't seen it like on Ease or really at most dispensaries.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Period.
I do want to go back to the PAX. The PAX has a vaporizer where you can put flour in it.
Okay, that's
And
different.
That's better, but I haven't hit that in a while because I lost the bottom of it.
Oh, so you have to rebuy the whole thing?
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway,
enjoy the interview. Well, just for starters, thank you again for coming on. We would love to know what kind of even got you interested in investigating marijuana pesticides and kind of like how you got into writing these articles.
Yeah, so like most things, I was drug in, kicking and screaming to looking at cannabis, right? This is about 21, 22. It's been about 3 years, this ongoing project. I had proposed prior to that to do an investigation into the black market weed and what was happening in California. And the editors didn't see a story there because it's just weed, right? There's always this attitude toward cannabis that it's, I mean, that's the story of weed in California for decades. It's illegal, but it's okay, and that kind of dynamic. And so I went on and looked at was looking at militias and the radical right wing in Orange County and doing other investigations. And the anniversary of Prop 64 came up, and they said, well, it's a good time to come back and look at weed. And I said, no. Hell no. You turned me down. I was just, mad. And but I did the reporting anyway. And what at that point, I started with the black market, trying to get my arms around just how much weed is grown in California, legal and illegal. Because to me, it's one market, it's not two. And then I saw what was happening to workers in the industry, the mass exploitation and deaths. I had like 55 weed worker deaths in the fields in 8 counties. They're dying from carbon monoxide poisoning in these greenhouses. People were setting up these massive greenhouses and putting propane heaters in them. And it's sealed, and then leaving someone there to guard the crop overnight. And in the morning, that guy'd be found dead, right? So, and it's because there was this green rush. A lot of people moving into the field in California, in the industry, going to make money, going to get rich, and had no clue what they were doing. And because I don't think we see those kinds of deaths as frequently anymore. But while I'm doing that, and that ran in 22 as a finalist for the Pulitzer, called Dying for Your High. I noticed I had a lot of time on grows of every variety and sort all over the state, and I got in the habit of going to the dump piles and poking through them. I was looking for clues to how did workers live, like was there food, little basic questions like that. And I kept finding these containers of the most illegal stuff. Can I cuss?
Yeah.
What's your PG rating here?
This is rated R.
R.
Say whatever.
It's for, yeah.
You're R. Okay. Well, yes. So, because I'm pretty salty when I get going.
Please. So are we.
Okay. But anyway, I found everything from the things that people know about, metamidofos, carbofuran. These are toxic, highly toxic, fatally toxic chemicals smuggled in from Mexico. They're banned in the United States. And but then lots of other stuff too. And on the legal operations, stuff that's supposed to be clean. And the question is, well, if they're using all these chemicals, what's showing up in the supply chain? What are the consumers being exposed to, right? And the state says, no, we test it. Trust us. And I'm the kind of reporter that when someone says, trust us, that's my first red flag on the field. Like, no, I won't. So I proposed to my editor that sitting in his backyard after one of my field surveys down in San Bernardino and their amazing cannabis scene down over there, that we buy weed and we test it. We find labs. And it took a little while to find some trusted labs that were willing to go do the work for us and put their reputation on the line with the state regulators, because they took a big risk. I mean, these are the regulators who govern them, and they don't want to tick those people off. So we found 3 labs in the end that did independent testing for us. And I kept expanding the list of what to test for, because the state tests for 66 pesticides. That's what they require. And in the end, we were at 160 or something like that, analytes, chemicals that we're looking for.
Are these chemicals that are illegal in the United States that you were able to test for that they're not?
Well, so what was happening is that California was leaving it to the private industry to police itself, and that whole system was broken. I can go into that for you why, but basically that trust us, legal weed is safe, it's been tested, was bogus. Because I mean in the June story of last year, that's the first piece that ran. it was like 60 some tests. We're now up to 538 that we've published, right? And we only looked at the legal market, and we principally only looked at vapes. And there's a reason for vapes that I can go into of why we really drilled in there. But all of that allegedly had a safety certificate with the state done by a private lab that looked for the 66 chemicals that are on the state list and supposedly passed, right? And we would pick up those same products and find dirty stuff. Like that's what the initial story was. I mean, one brand, and I name brands because I feel consumers need to know.
Yeah,
so
for
the
sure.
worst of the worst was Backpack Boys.
Backpack Boys. I've seen them in the
It
dispensary.
really trades on its street reputation as being like, a street brand and a street history. And it had like 36 pesticides. It was our record. And there is no way that, there has to have been, I don't know, fraud at how many different levels to get that into the state system, and the state take no action. So we have all these things going on. First, we have these growers using this stuff. Then we have these labs that are doing the tests on behalf of the state, lying about what they're finding or not finding it because their equipment's so bad, or someone's doing a switcheroo in the system. And then it turned out the third major finding is that regulators knew this and have known it for years, and they were keeping it from the public. And instead, protect public health is the very first sentence in the authorizing statute for the Department of Cannabis Control. It shall put that ahead of all other priorities. It says that. But instead of doing that, Department of Cannabis Control had launched a $5 million campaign that began running at the same time our first story came out, saying legal weed is safe weed.
I want to break down a couple things that you said. One, just going back a bit, when you were saying you wanted to investigate the black market, is that the illegal market? Yeah. I want to understand, because I think in this day and age, most people are buying weed from a dispensary in California. Is there a lot of black market sales still of marijuana, and is it just flower, or is it also vapes or everything?
Yeah, the black market is many times larger than the legal licensed taxed market. What I found is that you had legal growers sending product onto the illicit market or black market because the profits are higher and there's no taxes. And then you have the illicit growers in these everywhere from Siskiyou County, the biggest concentration of cannabis cultivation in California. None of it is legal. So where is all of that going, right? That county alone could supply the entire legal market in the state. That's how massive it is, right? And then you get your warehouse grows in Oakland. Many of them are also untaxed, unregulated, illicit. And that's some of that's going into the stuff that's showing up in dispensaries. Some of it's showing up in the illegal dispensaries, like a ton of them in LA. I have a frequent buyer card with one of them. If I can find that. I was going to show it to you. It's hilarious. I get little stars every time I buy it.
Oh my God. I want to see what it is.
a membership discount card. And but the larger, I think, illicit market or where this stuff is being sold is outside of the state. So it's, California's a huge exporter. For a while, Oklahoma was giving California a run for the money. Michigan, and as legalization has spread, it has created a cover for illicit cannabis too, because it's easier to grow under that. I have a license, but then you divert it to some other. So we got it. I did satellite mapping to estimate how large the California cannabis crop was, and that was several years ago, and that didn't account for the indoor growing, and I don't know where we're at now. But whenever the state comes out with these task force numbers of how many hundreds and or even millions of pounds they've seized, it's a drop in the bucket.
So are you saying that other states where marijuana is legal are also getting weed from California? And if so, like, is the risk of the pesticides just as high in other states as it is here?
Yeah, well, so the California weed with its pesticides is going across the country because it commands a high price. And even some of the legal brands show up in New York, for instance. But especially in the states that are not yet legal, there's a big market for California. But from everything that I understand about cultivation, everybody's weed is as dirty as California's. In other words, they're not growing it differently in Michigan. They're confronted with the same problems. It's an economic one. It's you want to grow 3 or more crops in a year, and you're not going to leave it highly spaced plants outdoor in the sun where there's not a lot of contagions and the plants are healthier. You're going to crowd them in. Worse if you're going to crowd them into an indoor space like a warehouse. So you've got your humidity, you've got your mold. Once aphids set in, the populations explode. And so when you grow that way, you're encouraging all these infestations that you then need to treat because it's such a high value crop. You either lose a couple $1 million in that crop or you spray. And the spraying became so common that in our story in December, when we published the 538 tests now that we have, and both legal and unlicensed cannabis, spraying was so common that we found legal growers who have a state license reporting to the state for years their use of illegal pesticides. And nobody noticed. Nobody paid any attention to it.
Why do you think people are turning a blind eye? Is it because they don't want to lose the revenue?
Yeah, I think it's a cash cow. I think when you look at who runs the Department of Cannabis Control, it's a woman with a background in economic development, which and she said in early interviews with me that she felt her first priority was to set up the market in California, to create a healthy, regulated market. And so to boost that market means boosterism, really. I mean, how many private businesses does state government have a vested interest in boosting? And so they did not have their own lab set up to test for pesticides. They had no way to back check and make sure, do what we did, to do some truth testing. That lab is still in the part of, I don't know if it's fully up and running yet or partially up and running, because they don't like to talk. It's not a transparent agency. But I do know that they've been relying still on other state agencies to test for them, to try to catch up and catch these pesticides. And there is, in fairness to say, since that first story ran in June, the state's recalled 290 products for pesticide contamination.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
the power of journalism,
Yeah.
honestly.
This is why I pay for the LA Times.
Yeah, it's just all stuff we told them about. And so the question is, well, why aren't they doing their own secret shopper program and going out and independently, do they really want to investigate this? Or do they just want to say that they cleaned it up?
Yeah, because I will say, this is something I've talked about with Bria on the podcast. I've traveled to other states, especially when weed was becoming legal. I was going to school in Boulder, Colorado when weed became legal. I voted for it, et cetera, et cetera. And then going to Washington and Oregon and California that followed shortly after. It's always felt, even from the beginning, that California dispensaries are like the experience of even just going into a dispensary feels unorganized not uniform except for like MedMen, but that was like that came years after or a couple years after. Like going even to like Washington and Seattle, you could not buy like an eighth of flour unless it was like in a pre-packaged container that was like certified, yada yada yada. My question is like, are there other states regulatorily like doing it correctly, or like is there a state that you feel like is at least ahead of where California is at, or is it just kind of all of a mess across the board?
Because it's not federal, every state is on its own, right?
Yeah.
And even though they do have the secret association, they won't release any records. The cannabis regulators of the different states get together and they talk, but all of that is confidential of what they say, right? So what I know is there's been some research done from academics who looked at all of the different states and just what on paper their criteria was, and they found like no two states alike, right? In what they require, what they're supposed to test for. That doesn't even get into the, well, how effective are they in carrying out what their paper says they are. And it varied from states with just a few pesticides that they would monitor to ones that supposedly monitor cannabis as much as they monitor food, because food is more than 300 chemicals that, and they do shelf testing for food products, and it's a federal program, but then states run it. So like California has one of the best, most aggressive food safety testing programs in the nation when it comes to pesticides, but those guys are not allowed to touch weed. That's the Department of Cannabis Control. There was an exemption put into the legislation. So what I've seen anecdotally then to answer your question is, like, Michigan is doing more than California in terms that it now also requires testing for synthetic THC, which we found in California. It's not legal in California, but the state won't test for it, nor will it approve a test for it. So Michigan's already done that and gone there.
So do you feel like if it was federally legal, that would help?
Well, it would even the field. How well it would be federally controlled is up to the federal, right? So if you have a good, strong federal program akin to the one for food, yeah, it would bring cannabis right up to the same level, at least, as the Cheerios you eat or the lettuce you buy at the salad bar, right? Which includes the public warnings, because think about how much California has known and kept secret from the consumer, right? That they would order a quarantine on product when they had an investigation going, but it was secret, and so consumers were never told when the state knew there was something. So you wouldn't, under a federal program, arguably, if it mirrored food, yes, it would be better. With the current restructuring of the federal government now, it's a question of, well, where would they set the bar? I have to say that people like you matter the most, because what consumers expect is usually what you get. And by becoming aware that there's pesticide issues, you begin to ask questions and you begin to have expectations of, because one of the main things I do when I do an interview is like, to you, what is clean? How do you define what's clean weed? How do you, what do you want? Do you want it medically safe? Will cause no carcinogens? Will you accept trace or small levels of carcinogens or endocrine disruptors, or, yeah. It's what your expectations and standards are. It's like organic food that started first, and then later came along the regulations.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I would say, like, I think it's like weighing the risk for the reward, right? Like, how bad is a certain pesticide for us to ingest versus smoking it versus in a vape? And I feel like, at least from reading your articles, vaping is probably just the worst way to ingest weed right now. myself, I've bought many of vapes, especially ones that are disposable, because I don't want to like deal with it. But I'm just curious, like, weighing the risk versus reward to you, having done all this research, like how concerned should we be, and like what would be the best way of ingesting it if we enjoy marijuana?
Yeah, well, vapes, it's convenient, it's discreet, comes in a lot of flavors. And I even saw some Coca-Cola stuff on the shelf of one. I think that was not legal, but it was still Coca-Cola stuff on the shelf of one store. And it's the fastest growing sector in cannabis, right? And especially when you've got the Canna Curious, you've got new people coming in, and young people especially. So it's really appealing to a large demographic. But you're correct that distillate vapes, I would put at the highest level of threat, of concern, because you're inhaling into your lungs. There is no barrier to your bloodstream that goes directly into your brain and your other organs. So so whatever is in your vape is in you, and delivered in a way that can immediately affect you. And so it has the potential to do the greatest harm. And we did find in our testing some vapes that had levels of pesticides in them that would cause acute harm, immediate harm. You might experience that as harshness. When someone talks about, oh, that was really harsh, burning in the lungs, watering eyes, coughing, irritation, you could feel that in your system. And though the majority of the stuff we found is a threat over time, and can bring on early onset of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, cause deformities to your unborn child, brain cell death. That was propargite. But you would have to have like a daily habit or consume over 10 years or something like that. Problem is nobody actually knows, because there's never been any research into the safety, because the tobacco industry made sure of that, because this has its history in cigarettes, where they avoided and sidestepped the whole question of safety of inhaling pesticides. Then you get down to things that are that you can still vape, but they claim that they're made differently and perhaps might be safer because there's like a single origin, crop in there. The other thing I haven't mentioned is that most vapes we found were derived from these mass batches of like 300 farms and 1,000 crops and stuff, right? It's like the pink filler that they call meat in a hot dog. It's like that, right? And so there's no ability to trace where something came from and what's being mixed in and stuff. The vapes are that blew me away when I saw the actual what was going into the vapes and how little, it's just this mass commodity of this. They make an oil that has no flavor, just THC, and then they add flavoring to it, be terpenes or whatever. But it's a commodity oil, so
every time I inhale a vape, I like sneeze. Like
I was just thinking that
I violently sneeze.
Yeah,
and
like that.
I feel like it can't be good for you. It almost feels like, to your analogy of like the filler in hot dogs, like we're in the phase of like where food was during the time where like the jungle, that book.
Upton Sinclair.
Yeah, like
Sinclair. Yeah.
Yeah, like we're in that phase for marijuana.
Or the 1950s in tobacco.
Yeah.
I really see a lot of similarities because it's still being pushed as medicinal. It's good for you. And the regulation hasn't caught up to it. And so it's like anything goes. It's like a real Wild West. And so on threat levels, then smoking, of course, is next down low, because smoking has its own issue that if you're smoking, there's a higher heat, and that heat is actually changing chemicals. It's called pyrolysis, and you get some spin-off substances like hydrogen cyanide from when certain pesticides are exposed to high heat, they convert into deadly things, but in very small amounts. And then after that, then, things you ingest, your liver and kidneys are filtering that out. So the health threat is less, but you're doing damage then to those organs because you've increased the load on them. And your lifestyle matters because this isn't your only source of pesticides in your life. And you have to think about adding, this is right, in and alone, if all you did was vape, but you did nothing else, and you lived in a place where the water was clean and the air was clean and the soil was clean, which I don't know that exists anymore, then maybe that's okay, right? But if you're in the Central Valley where they've been using these pesticides for decades, and it's in the soil or when the wind blows and it's in the dust, and it's in your food, and it's in your vape, then you have to think about that.
Yeah.
You asked something else. I'm sure I meandered.
Oh, no.
And
I was going to say, I know we are getting close to time, but I do want to ask too, because you mentioned like there are illegal dispensaries. How do you know if a dispensary is legal versus illegal?
Well, you can look up on the state Department of Cannabis Control, dcc.ca.gov, and under a section for consumers, they'll send you to, there's a link, and you can actually look up dispensaries to see if they've been licensed by the state. Another good test, though, is when you walk into a dispensary, ask when you buy a product to see the certificate of analysis. That's the lab test. It's as good as the paper it's printed on, as I've already warned you, because we found that there was a lot of fraud in the lab testing industry. But your unlicensed shops are not going to have that. When you walk in the door, there should be a little, like in restaurants, that certificate right there by the door and the inside.
Yeah, like the state of California
should be there.
Yeah.
The stuff we bought from the illegal shops was as clean or as dirty as the stuff from the legal. I hate to say.
Okay, so it doesn't matter.
For me, again, it's one market in my mind. I mean, there was a speakeasy kind of place in LA that I hit up, and I got some runts, and we tested the runts, and it had vitamin E oil in it, which potentially is lethal. Yeah, so there was that. But I also found stuff in the unlicensed shops that was completely clean. But I think that was legal product that had been diverted into the black market. So
interesting. So it also feels like, is it edibles is maybe the safest way right now to consume marijuana?
Yeah, everybody wants to know, okay, so what's safe? And well, we didn't test edibles.
Okay.
It is safer because your kidneys are involved, right? But if you know your grower, if you know your source, I think, and there are some programs that now certify like organic. So you can buy a vape, and if it says Echo, ECCO, or Cal Organic, I think is another. There are some, you can ask your bud tender, say, I just want something that these private groups have gone and tested and made sure that they're clean. Right. So it's above and beyond the state regulation. You can find that out. So if you still like a vape or just to roll your own joint or whatever, there are ways to do that.
Yeah. I think I've bought organic flour before, and I've been like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't know if it was like legit
or not.
I
visited. And I visited some of those farms, and they're pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So they count on insects, natural insects to control the aphids, and therefore they can't use pesticides because they would kill off the beneficial stuff. Mm-hmm. So you just want to steer away from things that have been blended with that commodity oil, as I call it, of distillate, because that's the mystery oil that I think where most of the problem exists.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we end every episode with a high idea of the week. And it sounds like, based on what you've said, that there is no magic bullet to fix the dirty cannabis industry. However, if you could give just one thing that could change about cannabis regulation or how things are working now to at least try to make it a little bit safer, what would you say is like your top thing that you'd like to see?
Yeah, no, there is a magic bullet. It's people like you. I mean, the moment people began talking about this, the state began recalling product. That's what changed. It wasn't that some other magic thing happened, right? It was that my daughter, and this made me a hero in her eyes, she walked down the street and she heard people on the sidewalk talking about, oh, they're the weed, this got these pesticides, you got to be careful. And so when consumers know that matters, and that's the magic bullet, the point that it's not, quote, just weed, that people care. And these are people. These are not like some marginalized segment of society only uses cannabis and we don't have to worry about them. So there's power in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I feel like the answer for the future is federally mandating it in the next 3.5 years.
Well, it has to be federally mandated and I don't know if that's going to happen in the next 3 years or 4 years, but hopefully eventually.
But we were talking about this too, like on an earlier episode, like it's still a Schedule I narcotic drug. Like it's still at the same level as like heroin. So at least lowering the level of how risky it is as a drug, do you think that could also help in the path to making it federally legal?
Sure. So one of the things I found in lacking was scientific academic research. And the reason was they could not get funding. And the reason they can't get funding is it's a Schedule I drug. So if you descheduled cannabis, you could start to get the smart scientists who could get grant money. Like there's this program at Arizona State University. They do a ton of stuff. But they were telling me there's no grants, there's no money. We can't, and we would like to investigate this. And we can't. And so consumers need more allies on their side, whether it's regulators or scientists, people like that, because the for-profit industry's interest is not paying much attention to public health. I mean, that's how we got to where we are. So descheduling on the federal side would help, because only if the federal government would then grant money to research cannabis. So you still have to have a government that cares.
Yeah, that's our short-term strategy.
Yeah.
We'll march on that. We want to thank you. We are definitely bumping up against our time on Zoom.
But thank you so much for coming, and we're going to link your articles below the podcast, but this was just super helpful to hear what is going on and just spread the word as much as possible.
We
so
definitely want to have you back too, especially if you have follow-up information. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions from people. This has been like the most informative episode we've probably had on this topic, and we're called High Girlies, so I hope to have you back.
That's great. No, it's a pleasure to talk. I'm so glad you guys are talking about this. Cool beans. Thanks.
Wow, what a great interview that was. That was so good.
Yes. I hope you learned a lot in that interview, because I sure did. And I definitely want to have Paige back on the podcast.
Oh, yes. We will definitely do a part 2, because she is on top of this so hard. She's updating.
Yeah, she's going to have an article coming out, I think,
this week. Week. So if it's out, we will link it. If not, we will add it later.
Yeah, so look out for that. And make sure to follow us at High Girlies Pod on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And also follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever
Rate and review.
Wherever you listen to us. Make sure to give us a nice review.
A 5-star, because one of our haters got to our Spotify reviews and now we have 3 stars. I don't know which one of you bitches did that, but clearly we have a hater.
Listen.
It might be, I'll bleep this.
Oh my God. If they're coming after us,
that would be nuts.
There's
no way. Yeah.
But yes, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe. And with that,
bye girlies.